Emmett Rourke, 42 years old, and hollowed out by war, grief, and 5 straight seasons of dust, first saw the girl clinging to the back of a supply wagon like a burr that wouldn't let go. She was small, dirt-streaked, maybe 12 at most, with arms too thin for the shovel she carried and a sunburn crawling down her neck like a brand. Her eyes didn't meet his when the wagon master shouted they had an extra mouth to unload. She just stepped down, boots half-tied, blouse stained at the collar. "She work hard?" Emmett asked. The wagon master laughed. "She don't talk much, but she ain't lazy. Don't eat much either. You'll like that." Emmett had seen too many like her. Orphans traded between ranches like sacks of beans, most of them broken before they hit puberty. He'd lost his wife to fever 2 years back, and the last hired boy he took in had robbed him blind and run off with the mule. He didn't need another problem. But when he looked at the girl again, she was already picking up a feed sack and hauling it toward the barn without waiting to be told. He took a breath through his nose. "What's your name?" She didn't look up. "Josie." That was all. By sundown, she'd mucked the stalls, mended a fence, and swept the porch like it owed her something. When she peeled off her blouse in the barn to wash it in a tin bucket, Emmett caught a glimpse of what lay beneath. Scars, dozens. Some healed, some fresh, and something else. A chain, thin and dark, looped around her neck and tucked beneath her undershirt like it might be made of fire. He didn't ask. He just stepped into the doorway and said, "Dinner's at 6. You can sleep in the bunkhouse." She nodded once, didn't say thank you, didn't ask for more. That night, while he sipped coffee and watched the wind carry grit across the fields, he heard her crying. Not loud, not broken, just a sound like someone trying to remember how to breathe in the dark. He thought about going out there, then didn't. Emmett had made peace with silence years ago. But something about the way Josie held herself, shoulders squared, like she expected every shadow to take a swing, unsettled him. She wasn't just another stray. He didn't know her story, didn't know what she'd seen, or what she was running from. But he knew this. Girls didn't come out of work wagons wearing scars and chains unless the world had failed them first. And Emmett Rourke, for the first time in years, didn't want to be part of that failure. By the end of the first week, Emmett knew Josie wasn't just tough. She was relentless. She rose before the rooster, barefoot in the frost, and had water boiling by the time the sun hit the porch. She carried 2 bales of hay at a time, one on each shoulder, and never asked for help, even when her knees buckled under the weight. He'd seen grown men fake injuries to get out of half what she did in a day. She didn't complain. Not once. She didn't laugh either, didn't smile, didn't sing, didn't ask for anything more than the heel of bread and the sliver of salt pork he set aside each night. By the 10th day, Emmett stopped calling her a kid in his head. She was something else. Not quite a girl, not quite a ghost. Just a quiet shadow that moved with purpose and didn't bleed where you'd expect. And still, he watched. It was little things. The way she flinched at the crack of the gate latch, even when it was only wind. The way she went stiff any time a man rode up the road, no matter how far off. And how she slept. Not deep, not peaceful, but coiled like a spring behind the bunkhouse stove, with one hand near her boot and her back to the wall. Some nights, Emmett passed by on his way to the outhouse and heard her talking in her sleep. Not in English, not fully, anyway. Sometimes French. Once in what sounded like Spanish. Once, he couldn't be sure, a prayer in Latin, muttered through clenched teeth. She never remembered in the morning, or pretended not to. Emmett didn't push, didn't ask who taught her to sharpen a blade with no wasted motion, or why her stitching looked like it came from a boarding school, not a trail camp. But every day, the picture cracked a little more, and what he saw beneath it didn't add up. 12-year-old girls didn't flinch at the sight of a U.S. Marshal badge unless they'd seen one up close, and badly. On the 11th night, he found her behind the barn, sitting on the fence rail, with her knees drawn up and her eyes staring off into nothing. "You ever gonna rest, girl?" he asked. She didn't look at him, just whispered, "Rest is when they catch you." He didn't ask who they were, didn't need to. He just nodded, tipped his hat back, and leaned against the post beside her. Whatever Josie was running from had taught her to survive. But survival came at a price, and he was starting to wonder just how much she'd already paid. Josie had learned early that secrets don't stay buried unless you choose the dirt yourself. It was a windless afternoon when she found it. She'd been sweeping out the back corner of the bunkhouse, where mice liked to build kingdoms from hay scraps and lost nails. An old coat had fallen between the wall slats and the floorboards, heavy with dust and age. She tugged it free, thinking maybe it could be cut down into something useful. Then she felt the weight inside the breast pocket, stiff paper, damp with old rust, and something darker. She pulled it out with care. An envelope, sealed in red wax, faded but intact, and blood. Just a smear, just a hint, but her stomach flipped anyway. The wax was imprinted, with a crest she didn't recognize at first. She turned it towards the light. A feather, a key, and the words, "Governor's Office, Territorial, Confidential." She stood there too long. Then, quick and practiced, she slid the envelope beneath her blouse and turned back to her work like nothing happened. But her eyes kept darting to the crack under the door. She waited until dusk, when Emmett had gone to the far paddock and the wind had picked up enough to hide the sound of match strike. In the small fire pit behind the barn, she burned the envelope's outer shell. Not the letter, not yet. Just the jacket, the name, the wax, the scent of whatever danger it carried. The fire flared higher than she expected. Emmett saw it from the hill. He didn't call out, just stood for a while, watching the column of smoke rise straight into the sky. Something about it. It didn't look like trash burning. Too controlled, too quiet. He didn't ride down, just turned and went back to fixing the fence, jaw tight. Inside the bunkhouse, Josie unfolded the inner contents with shaking fingers. One page, handwritten, formal. It spoke of a witness, a surviving heir. Unfit for custody under current circumstances. Remove and transfer discreetly. Any leaks will result in reassignment, or worse. No names. But she knew who it was about, and she knew what it meant. The men who'd been chasing her weren't hired to find her. They were hired to erase her, quietly, permanently. She refolded the page and slipped it into a false seam she'd sewn into her canvas satchel long ago. No one ever checked the inside of a bag, marked with blood and stitched with sorrow. That night, Emmett didn't mention the smoke. Josie didn't mention the letter, but something shifted between them. A silent understanding passed like thunder beneath the earth. She had secrets. And Emmett Rourke, whether he meant to or not, was now part of them. The morning haze hadn't yet lifted when the two riders appeared at the edge of Emmett's land. Dust kicked up around their horses like smoke, soft and deliberate, not the kind stirred by real urgency. They came slow, like men with time to waste, but eyes that didn't. Emmett was fixing a gate hinge when he saw them. By instinct, he straightened, not nervous, but ready. The older of the two wore a crisp brown duster, with no trail dust on it, which meant either he'd just changed or hadn't come far. The other was younger, twitchy, with a Colt slung too high on his hip. Both wore hats low and smiles thinner than paper. "Morning," the older man said as he dismounted. "Name's Laramie. My brother and I lost a calf last night. Marked, branded. Might have strayed through here." "Calf?" Emmett said flatly, wiping his hands. "This ain't much of a crossing trail." The younger man scanned the fields, the porch, the barn. Then his eyes landed on Josie. She was crouched by the water trough, scrubbing tack with her sleeves rolled up. Her hair was tied back, and her jaw set tight. When she felt their gaze, she didn't flinch, didn't move. She just went still. Too still. The kind of stillness that means danger is close enough to taste. Emmett followed their eyes, watched the older man's smile linger too long. "She yours?" the man asked. "She works here," Emmett answered. The man nodded like that confirmed something. "Quiet type?" "She gets the job done." There was a pause, nothing spoken, but the air grew heavier with things unsaid. "Well," Laramie said, mounting again, "if you see that calf, we'd sure appreciate the heads up." "Sure," Emmett said, not offering a handshake. They tipped their hats and rode off, but not in a hurry, not away, just out of sight. Josie watched until their shadows vanished beyond the ridge. Then she turned and went straight to the bunkhouse. That evening, she barely touched her supper. Emmett noticed the way her shoulders curled inward, how she kept her back to the corner, even while eating. After sundown, she swept the floors twice, checked the windows, and slid a thin knife under her pillow with fingers that didn't shake. Emmett stood by the doorway, arms crossed. "You expecting company?" he asked. Josie didn't look up. They weren't looking for a calf. "No," Emmett said quietly. They weren't. The lamp flickered between them. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door unlatched. The rifle leaned against the wall by his bed. That night, neither of them slept. Not because of fear, but because some silences are louder than gunfire. And some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood. Emmett found her by the corral, crouched low, blood dripping into the dust like raindrops on rusted tin. The barbed wire had bit deep across her palm, angry and jagged, but she pressed her other hand over it like pain was something she owed penance for. He crossed the yard in 4 strides. "Let me see it." "I said I'm fine," she muttered, teeth clenched. "You're bleeding like a stuck hog." She backed up, pressing her spine against the fence post, hand still hidden. "I'll handle it." "I ain't asking, girl." That did it. She turned her face away, not out of stubbornness this time, but shame, and held out her hand. The gash ran from thumb to wrist, red and raw, with dirt in the edges. He reached for his kerchief, but she flinched. "Why won't you let me help?" he asked, voice low now. "You trust me with your life in a storm, but not with a cut?" Her eyes glistened then. First time he'd seen that. Not full tears, just that hot shimmer of pressure too long bottled. "I'm not who you think I am," she whispered. He didn't move. "Then tell me who you are." She looked past him, past the barn, past the hills that had kept her secret. "My name is Josephine Eliza Monroe." The name fell heavy between them. I'm the daughter of Judge Elijah Monroe. He was killed with my mother 3 years ago. They said it was a robbery." Her voice cracked, bitter. "But it wasn't. It was political. My father kept records. Proof of payoffs, of land stolen, people vanished. He was going to take it to the Capitol. He never made it." Emmett's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. "They burned the house, the servants, my dog, everything." Her voice trembled now, the wall crumbling brick by brick. "I ran. I hid in coal carts, behind saloon walls, under pews. I haven't used my name since that night. I don't even know who's alive that still remembers it." She looked up at him finally, lips pale. "If you turn me in, I don't blame you. There's probably money in it. I've seen the posters." Emmett didn't speak right away. He took her hand gently, wrapped the kerchief around it with steady fingers, tied it tight. Then he met her eyes and said, "There's things a man can do for money." He paused. "This ain't one of them." She let out a sound then, something between a sob and a breath of relief, and slumped against the fence, the truth out and shaking in her bones. Emmett sat beside her. The sky above them stretched wide and open. But for the first time in years, Josephine didn't feel like she had to run from it. They smelled the smoke before they saw it. It rolled over the hills like a ghost, thick and black against the late afternoon sky. Emmett kicked his gelding hard, dust rising behind them as they galloped the last mile. Josephine rode beside him, her eyes fixed, unblinking. The barn was already half gone by the time they crested the ridge. Flames licked through the roof beams, swallowing years of sweat and harvest in minutes. The house wasn't much better. Windows blown, shutters cracked open like the place had been screaming. Emmett barely got his boots on the ground before the shot rang out. The bullet clipped his shoulder, spinning him down into the dirt. His rifle hit the ground beside him. Josephine dismounted before her horse stopped, dragging him into cover behind the old water trough. More shots, 3 men, maybe 4, hidden in the rocks near the fence line. Well placed. Paid, not drunk. She saw it in Emmett's face. He was fading fast, blood blooming dark across his shirt. Without thinking, Josephine sprinted low toward the barn, ducking beneath a broken beam. Heat slammed into her chest like a wall, smoke burning her eyes. One horse was still inside, Scout, the old mare, terrified and stompings in a far stall. "Come on," she coughed, cutting the rope with the knife Emmett gave her weeks ago. The mare reared but followed when Josie smacked her flank and flung open the side gate. Fire trailed them like a whip. Outside, bullets cracked again. She didn't flinch this time. She climbed the hayloft ladder, heart pounding, breath short, her father's name hammering in her chest like a war drum. She found Emmett's rifle and pressed flat against the scorched wood. The men moved below, careless now, thinking their fire had done the job. One stepped out too far. She pulled the trigger. The sound knocked everything else into silence. He dropped like a sack of stone. The other men scattered. One shouted, "She's a kid! She's just a kid!" before mounting fast and riding hard. Their retreat echoed into the hills like thunder, retreating after a storm. Josie stayed still for a long time, smoke curling around her, the rifle heavy in her lap. When she finally climbed down, the fire had lost its hunger. Embers glowed red where a home used to be. Emmett was conscious, barely. She knelt beside him, pressing cloth to the wound, trembling now that the danger was past. "You saved the horse," he rasped. Josie gave a weak laugh that turned into a sob. "I couldn't let everything burn." He reached up with bloodied fingers and touched her cheek. Neither could I. She looked at what remained, the blackened barn, the ruined house, the bodies they'd have to bury. This time, she didn't run. Because survival wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about staying and fighting back. The doctor stitched Emmett up by lamplight, his teeth gritted and jaw tight as rawhide. He barely made a sound, even when the needle dragged through torn muscle. Josie stood nearby, face pale but hard, holding the basin of boiled water like it was a rifle. By dawn, Emmett was upright, slower, but burning with something new. Purpose. Vengeance, maybe. But deeper than that, clarity. The attack wasn't random. Men don't ride 30 miles with torches and bullets for a girl, unless they have been paid handsomely. And it wasn't just about her past anymore. It was about what she carried, what she knew. When Josie finally slept, curled in the ashes of the bunkhouse floor, Emmett hitched the wagon and rode into Dry Hollow. The town clerk gave him a look that said he wasn't welcome. Still, Emmett nodded, laid a silver dollar on the desk, and said, "Need to see land transfers, banking records, anything tied to Judge Monroe's estate, or his name." The clerk hesitated. "Ain't nothing left of Monroe's holdings. All seized, auctioned, backdated transfers. Standard procedure." "Show me anyway." It took hours. Emmett's shoulder throbbed with every breath, but he kept digging. Names appeared again and again. Rail commissioners, private freight owners, and one that lit a fire in his gut, Whitlow and Sons Railway Trust. The same name burned into the bridle of one of the riders who ambushed the ranch. There were ledgers hidden in the back of the files, pages that shouldn't have been kept. But someone had been sloppy. Among them, Emmett found payouts, enormous sums, authorized by men in the governor's circle. Some tied to eminent domain seizures, others to removal operations. Monroe had been circling these names before he died, and Josie, Josephine Eliza Monroe, was never supposed to survive long enough to put them together. Emmett ran a thumb across the faded ink. One entry stopped him cold. Transfer arranged. E. Monroe. Child under contract until terminated. No date, no signature. He left the office without another word. Back at the ranch, Josie was awake and sharpening a blade. She looked up as Emmett entered, something unreadable in her eyes. "You were right," he said, holding up the ledger. "They didn't kill your father for spite. They killed him because he knew, and they've been trying to bury every last page since." Josie took the ledger and ran her fingers over the ink like it was a bruise. "I'm not just a witness," she whispered. "I'm the last line of proof." Emmett nodded. "And they know it." She stared out the broken window toward the horizon, where blackened fence posts still smoked in the wind. "They'll keep coming," she said. "Then we stop running," Emmett replied. "We take it where it counts, and we make damn sure they regret chasing ghosts." Josie looked down at the ledger again, not afraid, ready. They made it as far as Granite Creek before the world caught up with them. Josie sat stiff-backed in the wagon, clutching the ledger wrapped in oilskin like it was scripture. Emmett drove with one hand, the other resting on the loaded rifle between them. His shoulder still burned under the bandages, but he said nothing. He knew pain. This kind didn't slow him, it sharpened him. Granite Creek was a mining town dying on its feet. Half the storefronts were shuttered, the other half run by men who kept pistols beneath the counter and eyes on the door. But the deputy marshal Emmett had wired 3 days ago was waiting, young, sharp, and clean, like someone who still believed in oaths. His name was Connor Delane. "You sure about this?" he asked as Emmett handed over the ledger. Josie stepped forward before Emmett could speak. "This gets into the wrong hands. We're dead. My family's dead. What's left of it?" Delane studied her, then nodded. "I'll ride out first light. Take it to the federal circuit judge in Redstone. It'll be in his hands by the end of the week." But the end of the week never came. At sundown, the first shot cracked like thunder off the canyon wall. Emmett shoved Josie down behind the water trough just as the front window of the boarding house exploded inward. Delane was hit in the arm. Clean wound, lucky shot. But he was out of the fight. They were surrounded, 6 men, maybe 7, riding hard and dirty. One wore a black duster that flared like a preacher's robe. Another carried a badge, but not one issued by law. Pinkertons, hired and bound by coin, not justice. "They want the girl alive," Emmett said, loading his last shells, "but they'll kill the rest of us to get her." Josie's hands trembled as she tied her hair back. "Then they'll have to climb over bodies." They holed up in the blacksmith's shop, barricading the front with iron rods and an overturned wagon. Josie took position in the hayloft above, eyes steady on the main street. Emmett stood at the door with a scattergun and a look in his eyes Josie had only seen once, when he first found her bleeding in the dirt and chose to stand between her and the rest of the world. The gunfight was sudden and furious. One rider went down before he cleared the saloon. Another caught a shot from Josie's rifle clean in the chest. They tried flanking, but Emmett had lived through worse. He cut them off with fire and grit, and the kind of fury only a man who'd lost everything can summon. In the end, it was quiet. Blood in the street, smoke in the sky. Josie stepped out onto the porch, rifle still warm in her grip, the wind pulling at her coat. She looked down at the man she'd shot. He couldn't have been more than 20. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just turned back toward Emmett, bleeding again, limping, and helped him to his feet. This time, she wasn't the one being saved. This time, she stood her ground. By the time they reached Redstone, the story had already traveled faster than the wagon wheels could turn. People whispered in doorways, eyes flicking toward Josie and Emmett like they weren't quite real. Survivors, ghosts, or something more dangerous, truth bringers. The federal circuit judge, Matthias Harlan, was waiting behind thick glass and 3 armed guards. An older man with an iron jaw and weary eyes, he read the ledger page by page, each line cutting deeper into what remained of his faith in the law. When he looked up, it wasn't at Emmett. It was at Josie. "You're sure of this?" "My father kept the records," she said, voice clear but raw. "He tried to deliver them. They burned my family alive instead." Judge Harlan nodded slowly. "Then it's time we unbury the truth." He ordered a closed courtroom session. "For Josie's protection," he said. "For the integrity of the evidence," he added. But it was more than that. It was fear. Because what Josie carried wasn't just a ledger of numbers and names. It was a list of powerful men, some still in office, some richer than small countries, all tied to land theft, rail fraud, and political assassinations. Emmett sat beside her as she testified. Not once did she falter, not when asked to name the men who came to her house the night it burned, not when shown grainy photographs of officials still in power, and not when describing the nights she spent hiding in chicken coops, attics, and crawl spaces, too afraid to speak her own name. The judge listened in silence. So did the guards. When it was over, Harlan closed the file and leaned back in his chair. You understand, Miss Monroe? This means you won't just be a witness. You'll be a symbol. There will be trials, headlines, enemies. Josie didn't blink. They already took everything else. They don't get my silence, too. A motion was passed to arrest 6 men across the territory that very night. But even as they left the courthouse, Emmett's eyes scanned the rooftops. He knew better than to believe in clean endings. That evening, the governor's office issued a statement claiming they'd always intended to investigate Monroe's death. A lie, smooth as velvet. But it didn't matter. Because the next morning, Josie Monroe stepped out onto the courthouse steps, not hiding, not running, with the sun on her shoulders and the truth in her pocket. People stared, not at the girl who'd been hunted, but at the one who came back from the ashes with names, scars, and justice clenched in both fists. And Emmett? He walked one step behind her, hat low, rifle slung, the way a man does when he's not leading anymore, but guarding, like a father. The ranch had no roof when they returned, no porch swing, no barn left to mend. But the land still held them. The sky was the same, wide and watching. And Emmett Rourke, scarred and slower now, stood barefoot in the dirt, hammer in hand, rebuilding what fire had stolen. Josephine Eliza Monroe, Josie still, to the man who'd saved her, was 17 now, taller, stronger. Her eyes no longer darted at shadows. They watched the horizon with purpose. The trial had ended in 6 convictions, 2 disappearances, and a territory that suddenly remembered how to fear the law again. She stood by the fence post, sanding down a splintered rail, a child's laughter ringing out behind her. "Careful!" she called. A little boy, 4 years old, came tumbling out of the bunkhouse, wooden horse in one hand, a blue bandana tied around his head like a deputy. He grinned wide, his boots too big, his joy unbreakable. He didn't know the stories that carved this land. Not yet. But someday, she'd tell him. Josie turned as Emmett limped up beside her, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag. "He's got your stubbornness," he muttered. Josie smirked. "And your taste in hats." They stood in the light for a while, breathing the dust and sun, watching the boy chase butterflies between the apple stumps. The ledger was long gone, sealed in the judge's vault, locked with testimony and federal seals, but the truth it carried had planted roots deeper than trees. This place, this scorched patch of earth, had become something neither of them expected. Home. Not because it was safe, but because they'd chosen it, because they'd earned it. Josephine looked at the carved sign hanging from the new gate. Monroe Rourke Ranch, a name stitched together from pain, survival, and second chances. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked quietly. Emmett didn't answer right away. He just looked at her. Not the girl in chains he'd found behind a supply wagon, but the woman who'd stood before a federal court and made wolves shake in their boots. "No," he said, "but I'm damn glad we did." Behind them, the boy laughed again, and the sun dipped low behind the ridge. The past still lingered, in burn marks, in memories, in the way Josie kept a knife near the door and a rifle by the bed. But it no longer owned her. Not now. Not ever again. Because she wasn't just the girl who ran. She was the one who came back. The one who stayed. The one who made ashes into something new. If this story touched you, and you like this kind of story, subscribe and be here for the next one.